All right, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. Briefly, has everybody had a chance to review the May minutes? And are there any additions or corrections? No. Excellent. Motion to approve? Thank you. Anybody seconding? Second. Thank you. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you. Correspondence, briefly. Excused folks, Dr. Mao and Dr. McHugh. And 5 Quad Ambulances announced that they are out of service for the summer. Thank you, 5 Quad Ambulance. We also got a late entry into the correspondence. For anybody that's interested in some light reading, we have the ambulance transportation plan for Camp Bisco. So if anybody is interested in some light reading, it is here. Not to be confused with Camp Bisco, but Dr. Bosco is also excused today.
Camp Bosco?
Camp Bosco is actually very different.
Actually, it's very Villa is
Perfect. Academic committee report, please, Dr. Dorman.
Yeah, okay. A few things we went over. Internships we're still talking about, so we're going to meet with a few people up in Saratoga and discuss where we're working, where we're going to go with that. Talk a little bit about LVAD, and I will get the contact person number for everybody, so that she will come out and do a dog and pony show for anybody that has an LVAD in their region, and bring some equipment so people can play with it and get used to it. The whole list of regional training courses that are out there if anybody's interested in those. Probably the most significant thing is that it came to light that only paramedics or critical care folks who are on the controlled substance plan in their agencies can actually push the drugs. Therefore, students can no longer push controlled substances when they're doing their training in the field.
Sorry, say that again, Don, I apologize.
Why don't you mention it there, Mary, since you have the you know all about it.
Hudson Valley had contacted us questioning whether or not interns could push narcotics as part of their internship med pushes. And the answer is no, because public health law specifically states you have to be credentialed as either a critical care or a paramedic to push the narcotic, and you also have to be a participant in the plan. Students would not fall into either category. A very select group of students would, that might be attending a bridge class from critical care.
I don't believe you said that word.
Sorry.
I'm telling Andy.
But a very small group might fall into that parameter, but it's limited that they're interning with their own agency.
So there's a very small group of people who might be involved in a program under advanced standing who are already credentialed within an agency that would be allowed to push controls, but otherwise they would not be able to push those while they were a student.
That is correct.
Exactly.
What about in the hospital? In the hospital, it's okay, right? Because we do it in the hospital too,
Don't ask that question.
with the nurse standing right over them.
Don't ask that. Delete that.
No. That would be interesting.
It's up to hospital
question.
policy.
I can step out and call George Fredericks.
Can I?
Do other unlicensed providers who are students in the hospital push drugs?
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah, but they're
We want to hear this.
Well,
No, they're students. They're not doing anything.
Right.
no, does this fall into one of those times it's best not to ask the question?
Yes,
I
probably.
think so, yeah.
right up until the time they get in trouble for it.
Well, who gets in trouble for it?
Right.
The agency and the student, and it derails their career. They push a drug and they're done.
In the hospital, it's not going to affect an agency.
Well, I understand it, and if they're not allowed to do that, and it's found out, and they went ahead and did it anyway.
If they're under the direct supervision of the nurse who's credentialed to do it and the nurse is documenting it.
I know that was sort
Well,
of
the difference is though,
what's the difference between that and the
the
agency?
setting, because the clinical
Pre-hospital
setting
specifically states.
is for pre-hospital providers in the pre-hospital world is supervised by a pre-hospital personnel. where in the hospital, inside the hospital walls, the supervision is different.
Yeah, let's not forget that little nuance that we're not licensed as paramedics, we're
That's
licensed
the
as
nuance.
nurses.
And that's totally nuance, and then your overseeing body, in this case, is DOH, not education. And if DOH says you must be an EMTCC or above to manage these medications, if you're a student, you're nothing, other than whatever student, or an advanced standing student with EMTCC, that's differentiated, but if you're an EMT student going up, that's different.
How does,
Fairly clear.
well, how does the same documentation address performing any other advanced skill?
Right.
We were looking specifically at the narcotics plan, and the narcotics part of 800. This one through Lee.
Yes.
It's
The NARC part
specifically
specifies.
Specifically
precluded by the
says.
Right, the
narcotics.
NARC part
It's
is
the
what.
narcotics that are
An
precluded.
issue here.
This does not apply to other drugs, just specifically the narcotics.
We keep using the term narcotics. We're talking about controlled substances as a whole, though, right?
Yeah.
I found it in the policy statement on fentanyl from, I think, '09. And it specifically says CC, paramedic, a member of that agency's controlled substance plan.
Howard, so did I, which is why I called, because
Yeah.
'09 was 3 years ago.
Right, yeah.
So I was looking for the current interpretation of that.
Mm.
Sarah?
Is it critical to their training that they push controlled substances? Is it different than pushing other meds?
No.
You don't slam it in unless it's an anticholic.
Monitor
I mean,
before
is
and
it
after
really,
making a
yeah,
decision.
is it really that critical? Is this that big of a deal?
That was just no discussion.
No, probably not, but I think what we want to make sure is that we're laying a good foundation for people's, continued practice. And it's a shame to have to preclude that ability of their practice in the field while they're going through a field internship. I don't know, is this something that we should ask for a reclarification on? I don't think that it would be an unreasonable one, to ask formally for it to be reviewed by narcotics enforcement and by the Bureau, but I leave that to the group.
I don't think they're gonna be all that flexible on non-credentialed practitioners handling controlled substances. You
I think
can
you're back
ask all
to,
you want, but I.
really want to ask the question.
Well, no, the problem is this question's already been asked and is on the, that one's already out there.
Not out there to the narcotics bureau, out there to leave.
So you're saying then it would lead us back to an audit, but where we go with this, now that we have the information, is we should issue an advisory reminding people that this is not something that should occur. Unless you feel that the two programs themselves could address this well enough through your relationships with the agency.
Hudson Valley has chosen to address it by not permitting any of our student interns, even if they were in the very small number of CC who might be on an operational plan already, to push narcotics during an educational internship. That way, no agency has to keep two lists of who can and who can't. So that is what we have chosen to do, and that
Even
was
in the
what our
hospital?
letter said. Pardon?
Even in the hospital?
No, this is internship.
Okay.
Field internship only, overseen by credentialed, not licensed. That we need, no mention of in-hospital clinical.
And Cobble Skill's in the middle of formatting a letter to our contracted EMS agencies to basically say, just a reminder, this is what the state has said we can and can't do.
Adhere to the law.
Basically. Now, what might come to the forefront for the physicians in the room is that you may have, if someone has called in actually for orders, and the intern had been in leadership as effectively running the call, we have asked that the intern state the order as in an echo back out loud to the physician, and then hand whatever communication device he or she is using to the preceptor, so that the preceptor can also verify that order. So with a narcotic order, you might get two people requesting that, and We apologize, but we figured that would keep the intern and the preceptor safe.
They put us on speakerphone.
Could do that, as long as there are two people that could verify, the preceptor and the intern both verify.
We discussed this among our faculty, and obviously, you know, I think that controlled substances have become a standard of care, very much so, and I think it's one of those things where we certainly don't want to lose the ability to have the medication push, because when you're looking at medication pushes in the field for your students, a large population of the drugs administered is albuterol, aspirin, and controlled substances. So we're going to lose a lot of IV medication pushes by not being able to do this. But when I spoke with somebody from the state, they referred me straight back to the fentanyl policy from 11, which I'm reading directly from. It says only those individuals certified at the EMT critical care or paramedic level may participate in the operational plan and administer a controlled substance medication to a pre-hospital patient. So I don't think there's really any wiggle room unless they're willing to rewrite that to include paramedic students under, you know, under observation or under the direction of paramedics or critical cares.
I suspect when that was written, though, there wasn't any thought about students. It was just, these are the people who can do this.
Well,
Not thinking.
I think that's the bigger question that maybe shouldn't be asked at this point, because in thinking about it, I was hard pressed to find an area anywhere where the Department of Health refers to students. So
However,
you don't want to ask that bigger question.
Directly as a student in the field. I don't know about the hospital, that's an interesting question, but I think that whole statement was directed right at the student not to touch the narcotics in the field.
Or allowing some other paramedic affiliated with your agency to use your narcotics. I show up at the scene, I don't work for you, but it's your narcotics. I'm not credentialed like you. So.
Right. I mean, the way I kind of interpreted this at first is this is a policy statement that's really going out to how do agencies manage their narcotics, how do they manage their controlled substances, forgive me, and that being a paramedic student via contract with the agency would automatically give them an opportunity to do stuff, ALS care, as a student, so therefore would be included in the ability to perform a paramedic level skill under the auspices of the paramedic watching them. But it's pretty black and white in this statement.
I think that what you just said is what we all believe, and that has, I mean, I'm sure that all of you out there have either given an order to an intern or have overseen an intern who perhaps gave a narcotic. However, you know, once it's pointed out in black and white, I think Jonathan has the right thing, and that is obey the law. Either obey it or change it.
My only thought that when I read this, it seems pretty clear that this is directed towards agencies, and it doesn't mention students in this at all. So I took this to mean that it's direction for how to use narcotics within an agency. So that I assumed that because it didn't exclude paramedic students acting, you know, with a paramedic, that they'd still be able to do that under the auspices of the paramedic.
Well, keep in mind, this letter that went out applies specifically to Hudson Valley student
Right.
interns in our paramedic program.
Right.
This is how we're choosing to manage our interns with an eye toward what we see as protecting agencies and preceptors.
Right.
It's not our job, nor do we take it over to try and interpret exactly what that black and white means. But for us, this is how we're managing our interns.
Well, it may not be a bad idea to get an advisory out, and it just covers it all.
The question is exactly what that advisory should say still, because I think the question that remains a little bit tenuous is the in-hospital push, and are we poking the bear?
Mm-hmm.
Jack?
I kind of missed the beginning of the conversation. Is this a law, or is this a DOH policy? And where would that
I
policy?
think it
where would
actually
that,
falls in reg, doesn't it, Mary?
Yes, it comes out of 800,
who
but
had-
there's also, on the fentanyl policy, which is where Howard's quoting it, it's very clearly spelled out.
So that's a
The other
law.
thing is, I challenge anyone in here, because I've read almost every narcotic plan going, who has students included on their narcotic plan?
That's not my
What
point.
agency has students included?
My point is, if all of us agencies that participated into students, and we could change our plan to include students, so the big.
They would get denied because it's violating policy.
Right, right. So, the change in policy, would that take place at the CMAC, DOH, legislature, or does that take place?
DOH.
Is that something they could look at? We could-
Well, that's the question, that was one of the questions that I broached as to whether this is something we would want to address that way. Some of the advice that came from the room was, let's not have the Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement start looking at this, because they would weigh in rather than just the Bureau of EMS in terms of reg development. Tim?
Can you amend your plan to include students?
Yeah.
It goes against
You'll end up
policy.
with the same issue.
Sounds like it goes against policy.
Just to throw a little different point of view, I wish it weren't this way, because we have had instances where new credentialed medics did not know how to administer the carpet because they hadn't been allowed to do it. They hadn't had any call to use another drug in it. They weren't allowed to do it under the direction of another medic and to have them guided through it. So it became quite problematic. They didn't know to push it forward, pop the membrane, and be able to have it work. And as a result, they put so much pressure on it, it blew up in the back. And it just squirted everywhere. And then the documentation on that was a pain in the ass. Excuse me. But the reality is, they missed something in their internship by not being allowed to do that. I've come up with a workaround, which is we're going to get enough carpet jets once they become available. Benadryl is cheap once you can buy it again, and it's the same administration system. So you're going to need to make sure that the people get trained on it appropriately so they can actually use it, because the problem has occurred not once or not twice. So.
Well, that's how to give a carpet jet, not how to give morphine. That's a different animal.
Well, no, I understand that, but if you can't physically get it out of the container, it's the same delivery system. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
And part of an internship is to learn how to use your tools and the physical motor memory of doing it
Right.
and understanding how to do it.
Right, but I'm
So
not
they
sure that
lose out
requires
on
a
that.
change in policy or regulation.
No, I'm just
That
saying
just
that
requires-
by not allowing them to do that, they miss out.
I think in the grand scheme of things, based on what we've done in this region with controlled substances and the relationship that we have with the Bureau of EMS and the Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement, my thought would be, let's make sure that each of our agencies knows students do not push controls and do not have controls in their hands, that we continue to maintain a very clear position of leadership and assuring the security of controlled plans. And therefore, we then continue to grow in our relationship with BNE and EMS on this, rather than creating additional work for them by looking to change reg. That just seems to make
The
sense
point
to
of
me.
this regulation is not to exclude students, it's to delineate which certified providers, not licensed providers, are able to utilize this modality.
I agree.
So it's not a student issue at all.
It's not a student issue at all, but it now has been interpreted that way, so it's now trickled downhill. I think we have to be careful before, it expands in directions we don't want it to. And at the same time, I think we can't really look at how this is being done in the hospital, because nursing working with students of any type is a Department of Ed issue, not a Bureau of EMS issue, or Department of Health issue, really. So I think in the hospital is a very different situation. In the field, maintaining that additional level of control and making sure that any training on a controlled substance plan includes the use of whatever happens to be there, including, a perfect example would be, we're stuck going back to ampules again for fentanyl. Guess what? We've got to go get some ampules of something and train everybody how to open an ampule to make sure that we don't end up with extra loss from ampules. Just the same way we can from cartridges. So, make sense? Advisory or no advisory? Or just have staff communicate directly with ALS coordinators? I would prefer to have staff communicate with ALS coordinators rather than a formal advisory on the website.
I think it's really a function of the academic institutions, not their students.
Well, this has gone out to all of our interns via their electronic communication means, and the letters have gone out to all of the agencies with whom we have a contract. Because this specifically is how we intend to manage our students. I'm not telling anybody else that's doing a CC or a paramedic course what they should be doing. But this is how we have chosen to manage ours.
I would suggest that since that coverage is going to be relatively complete, but not complete, let's just make sure indeed that we are hitting every agency which we have a relationship with to make sure that nobody's getting missed. Because one more opportunity to have that discussion is just one more opportunity to keep people out of trouble. But let's not put anything on the website. Sound okay?
If anyone would like a copy of the letter that we sent to agencies, I have a, sure.
Nothing else from academic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. CMAC report. I'm going to borrow from Rich's notes a brief report from Med Standards, which was the only thing that was entered into the SEMSCO minutes. But the most notable of all, if we ignore the nice italicized comment of the Dr. Daly protocols, they are not. They're the collaborative protocols. Joe, Mary, do you guys know what happened up north of us? Have the folks in which region? There was another region that was looking to adopt our protocols as well.
Yeah, I think they did.
Did they?
Yeah.
That was the Susquehanna.
No, north.
Yeah, I know you're talking North Country.
North Country, thank you.
Yeah, they supposedly did.
Okay, they were talking about it.
Yeah.
So at this point, our protocols encompass the Susquehanna region and the North Country region as well, meaning that we now go across the top of New York State and come up from Pennsylvania all the way across to Vermont and Massachusetts. So congratulations. What we'll be doing is getting a couple of people from these regions to join us in a protocol committee to continue to look at things and continue to collect comments as they adopt these. What we're doing as each agency comes on board, or each program agency comes on board, they're getting in touch with Tim. We are going to produce the protocol books for them at a reduced cost to them, and we're going to change the art on the cover to continue to increase the section of New York State covered by it. We're doing that just because it's entertaining. What?
It's like
Maybe you
the
should
flag with
start-
13 stars
You
on
can
it.
start signing the editions.
That's right, we should have actually editions. I think it's
First
probably a
edition.
good idea. First edition, second edition, third edition. We've put the thought process forward to Hudson Valley. It's in discussion down there. Frankly, I think that's far enough south, but that's just me.
We'll never get past that.
Huh?
The Mason-Dixon line.
The Mason-Dixon line at the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yonkers.
We'll get across the river.
Well, thanks for pushing that. I mean, this would not, it's, you know, I know you made a comment, it's not the daily protocols, but in a large part, it is the daily protocols.
Well, that's because my wife created the layout.
Years and years ago.
But thank you, Bruce. Thank you. And Rich is right that 4 out of 18 is now taking us to 22%, but I think we're well over 35% of the landmass of New York State right now.
Absolutely.
And at least 50% of the deer.
Did they demand a tick protocol?
Probably. Statewide ALS pediatric guidelines were adopted with some creative discussion. Is that a good way of putting that?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, creative discussion. There was a significant discussion about medication shortages and how they should be addressed. Basically, there's a small working group of physicians, and I thought it included a pharmacist. It turns out it doesn't, who are working with the Bureau to create a matrix of drug replacements should we end up with shortages. Basically, it's very close to what we've been doing all the way along the line anyway, but we're going to keep that information and use it as necessary should we have any more drug shortages. Some of the substitutions were odd. There was a lot of discussion about things like agonist, antagonist agents for opioids, substitution, and that kind of stuff. So interesting discussion. There's been some work there. There's more work that needs to be done. But basically, it's going to continue to be completely reactive as it's been in the past. And
The body's just informational for the programming, that's it, that's information.
goal would be, Bruce, is that should there be a shortage of a medication, you'd be able to substitute in that shortage without sending the state your protocol to do it. Unfortunately, some of the way that the matrix came forth to us had drugs and dosages that didn't quite make sense. Using droperidol at a dose of 2.5 milligrams IV for nausea, for example, which will leave somebody no longer nauseous, but also no longer conscious for a very long period of time. So probably not exactly what was intended.
As long as we can vary if we wish.
True.
that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think any of the things that we are currently faced with will leave us in a position where we can have, where we're going to have a problem as we take the information forward. So
Mike, I
we'll
have
just
a
have to
couple
continue to have
thoughts
discussions.
on this. It also seems to be regional with the shortages as well. We'll have a full supply of a certain medication in Gloversville, and they'll have none of it in Saratoga, or vice versa. So I'm sure that same thing is going on where Albany has medications and Saratoga doesn't. So for some reason, and I really can't make sense of it, it doesn't seem to be a universal shortage of a particular medication.
It ultimately is a universal shortage of the medication, Todd, but the problem is that buying habits and PAR levels are different at each facility, and then usage habits are different at each facility. So the other thing that makes it even more difficult is that buying groups are different for each hospital. So we found that some of the buying groups will continue to have access to a medication even when most others don't, which has led to us having creative workarounds, particularly with pharmacists that are A, creative, and B, very willing to work with EMS agencies. Two that need to be complimented very highly are the folks at Northeast Health, who have been spectacular at working with us in order to come up with solutions, working within BNE and DEA regs to come up with solutions, and Columbia Memorial. Both the pharmacists at those programs have been fantastic. There have been other facilities that have been more difficult to work with, to say the least. Sarah?
EMP has sites all over the place, and the EMS directors have been emailing about medication shortages, and they are everywhere, and it seems to be the same stuff. So, while there may be hospital fluctuations in the area, I don't think it's that some pharmacists are more resourceful than others or anything like that.
Well, the one that comes to mind first is actually the one that affected all of Columbia and Greene counties, which was CMH, where their pharmacist went out and got the 5 milligrams in 1 ml of midazolam specifically for EMS. They have no use of that in the hospital whatsoever. She began to start trying to restock that medication 4 months before it was due to expire. And we got involved to assist a week before it was due to expire because they still had been unable to get any medication. Ended up coming up with a creative solution that got them the drug. All of the drug did expire, went out at the same time, and they were able to stay out. If I don't see anybody from Columbia County in the room, but I believe Columbia County was out of midazolam for about 8 or 10 hours. So it ended up working out extremely well with no rules being broken, which was the most important thing, ultimately.
The other discussion I think we should have is what about, and I think most of the agencies here have multiple ambulances, what happens when you're running short and we have in our formulary specific requirements for quantities of medications in the drug box?
Do you have the text? Yeah, the text of that advisory. We talked about that last month, Todd. Let me just, I'll read into the record the advisory that we wrote and issued, which addresses that specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. Sorry about that. While I'm waiting for Tim to come back, One other thing that we discussed at Med Standards is the adoption of the new the new national standards, which allowed New York State to have a discussion as to whether or not we should include the education of intravenous epinephrine into the educational standard for these new standards. Not the scope of practice for the advanced EMT, just the educational standard. That took a long time for us to understand. We ultimately think we do, and we voted to include it. This doesn't in any way affect whether or not intravenous epi is actually a good idea, whether or not it works or saves lives. It was just a question of whether or not it should be included in that educational standard. And we're ultimately not sure what that's going to bring to bear. The other interesting discussion that came up was with our adoption of the new national standards, which actually don't include a I-99 or critical care tech or other intermediate level advanced EMT below paramedic, whether we were going to see an end to the critical care curriculum in New York State, and we were told that no, we were not, even though we were adopting the new standards, and I'm not sure I understood all of that either, but I am really sure that I'm not going to get clarification from either Mary or Joe. Right? Yeah. Very clear. Okay. Rich, while we're waiting for the advisor, do you have anything else that you would like to point out? You're eminently, or you're and Carol,
There's
eminently entertaining
They're written copies.
notes?
Most of it is old news by now, I think, for most people. Just to recap for anybody who missed it, Lee Burns, who had been the acting director for nearly 3 years, I think, since Ed Lonsky's retirement, is now officially our director, which is a wonderful thing. Could not have picked a better person for the job. The Article 30 changes, which was a saber rattled a couple of months ago, have all been withdrawn. They're not a threat for this year. They may come around again next year. This Utica case is interesting. Those of you who have followed it, in a very rare split 3-2 decision, the Appellate Division, 3rd Department of the Supreme Court ruled to annul the State Council's determination in the City of Utica matter, which interestingly does not grant them an operating certificate, but merely annuls the Semsco's determination. So I don't know where it goes from there. Mary or Joe, have you heard anything?
Haven't heard anything
Inside, okay.
yet. Still with DLA.
It's still, I figured it would be at DLA for some time, probably. And the Bureau has moved. You guys have moved, actually, right?
Well, Joe and I did not.
Joe, I'm sorry, the central office has moved. That's correct. 275 Central Avenue, a beautiful part of Albany, down the road from Mohawk Ambulance. I think that's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That advisory we sent out basically refers to medication shortages, replaces our advisory of 2010-04. EMS continues to face a series of medication shortages. Federal and state authorities are working to address this issue, but there will be ongoing problems that will need to be managed on a local basis. Remac and Remo will assist as needed with operational questions regarding potential medication substitutions, alternative sources, or other ideas. To remain operationally sound, agencies may review medication usage, modify their formularies, and reduce quantities based on historical usage patterns. Medication quantities may be reduced and medication concentrations may be changed as needed. No medication substitutions may be made without approval of the Medical Advisory Committee. Agency ALS coordinators must notify Remo with any changes to the approved regional formulary. All controlled substance formulary changes must be approved by the DOH. And then we review some immediate shortages right now below. One example of a shortage that Remo is about to get a note from is the city of Schenectady. Their fire department will be out of dopamine effective next week. The nice thing is that we actually haven't used any dopamine in the city of Schenectady in the last 2 years. So we don't anticipate that there will be any drastic patient care issues as a result of that. Hock, nothing?
I wasn't there.
Okay.
And I did not get the minutes from it.
Okay. Agency upgrades for notification only: Eagle Mills, glucometer, Rensselaer Fire, albuterol, Ravina Rescue Squad to albuterol, Glenville Fire to EPI, Rensselaer Fire Department to EPI, and Taborton was returned. No ALS upgrades. BLSFR, Union College is officially deactivated?
That was as of yesterday or so, but that may not be the case because Dan is sending out these deactivation notices.
Okay.
And within 30 minutes, it's almost a guaranteed phone call back. This is one of like 6 that has called back.
Okay. Mariahville, Alplaus, Pattersonville, and Galway have all upgraded. Guilderland EMS is formally transitioning to EMS charts. Excellent. And no pad apps this month.
There are, there's 2 months worth of pad apps on a separate attachment. There were copies on the table. Everybody should
Okay.
have one, and they're welcome to have one.
Excellent.
There's about 30 of them.
Okay. And we're going to explore how to use the ATRIS registry, so we have an electronic registry of all of our pad applications to be able to get more information more rapidly back to the pad folks. Dr. Ushkow had brought up the idea of pre-hospital transmission of patient name and date of birth to receiving EDs. We had some email discussion about that. Bruce, do you want to speak to that?
It's always interesting how you start one thing and you learn something else that you thought you understood. We started our cath lab about 6 months ago, and I thought I had a fairly good understanding of HIPAA. And I realized that there's some things I didn't understand. There is an exception that Albany Med knew about, but I didn't know about, so I want to share that information with you and then carry on some other discussion. And that's that there is an exception to HIPAA that allows you to transmit, or if you're on a cell phone, talk on your cell phone, and give the patient name and phone number, or whatever important data you require. The exception states that if it's for the necessary good of the patient, there is an exception. Normally you can't just, if somebody has an ankle twist, you can't give out their name on the cell phone. But if you have somebody with a STEMI alert, and you need to call up their old EKG, that's patient specific, it's time dependent and required, you can actually have the paramedic give you the name and birth date of the patient, so you can call it ahead of time. You can call it up and say, oh yeah, it looks just like their old EKG, or more importantly, no, it doesn't look like their old EKG. Extending this out even further, imagine you're in a faraway land where that might have even prompted a flight. They get on the scene, they come up with this thing that looks like a STEMI, they're in a faraway land, they would call a helicopter for it, and instead they send it to the local hospital. The local hospital says, no, that's their EKG, even if it does say acute MI right across the top. So it would prevent a flight and potentially even an inappropriate cath. Because sort of once you get that ball rolling, let's say you call the helicopter, it's really hard to sort of prevent them rolling into the cath lab and getting their groin pierced. So the exception to the rule is you can relay that information, patient name, date of birth, over the phone. And that sort of brings up sort of the next section. If you're in Albany, you have direct communication with the EMT paramedic. It makes things easy. If you're IM, you don't always have that option. I would say about half of the district that I cover, the area that I cover, they're not able to give us transmission until they're very close. They'll ultimately transmit. So what they do is they simply call us from the house and say, we have a STEMI alert. Or they'll call their dispatcher if they can't, for some reason, use their phone in the house. Because some people have dropped their phones now. And go through the dispatcher and just, it's all the information I have. 67-year-old STEMI alert. And that's 30 minutes out. Thus, it will be there in 30 minutes, which really works out fine for us because we're willing to activate on that. Our cardiologists have bought into the fact that every once in a while they're going to come in, and it's not going to end up being a STEMI, but we're going off the paramedic's read. And then as they get closer and they can actually transmit, then they do so. So that's the piece I didn't know. Albany Med had been collecting this information already and been using that rather successfully. That I did not know. Where Mike and I got into a conversation is, can we use a dispatcher to give that information? And my thoughts were, I see there's no reason why the dispatcher can't give the patient's name and their date of birth. So we can call that information up, which gives me 30 minutes notice. Any discussion?
Well, I've been doing that for a long time. I mean, if I get a call from EMS and they're seeing something funky on the EKG, I've asked them for the name and date of birth and pulled it up. I've never considered that to be a HIPAA violation. It's not like, my concern would be if you're broadcasting it over the radio. If they're calling it on a BLS radio with it and you're giving name and date of birth over the radio, I would be more concerned about that. But over a cell phone, I would have no problems. And I have multiple times gotten name and date of birth so I can pull up the old EKG. So I was never concerned about that. The question is if they're calling on the BLS radio, can they give the name and date of birth over that?
It sounds like they can.
Calling,
can.
calling to your dispatcher over the VHF public safety band is infinitely more public
Yeah.
than your cell phone or potentially your ambulance to hospital transmission. But that's not for us to debate.
The interesting thing is, though, you're talking about a case from Pittstown, right? Where are they? They're at the Jones residence for a 57-year-old male who had chest pain. That's already out there over the air, you know. So.
Can you give the last name?
Very frequently in rural America, the answer is this is the patient's name.
Well, I wonder if the public safety guy answering the phone, the PSAP guy, is considered to come under HIPAA. There's no relationship in terms of public safety. It's a relationship in terms of the healthcare provider and the patient.
But you can
What's
relate
the-
that to the doc.
No, I know that, but I'm saying the dispatcher takes a 911 call and say whatever he wants. It's not bound by him. He's a dispatcher. But once that directed care apparatus is rolling and your agent, your emissary is on the scene, is that where the problem comes in? Confidentiality.
Well, according to our MDJD, there isn't a problem. You could even put it out on the VHF radio, because it meets the exception that it's time dependent, it's life-threatening, it's, even if you wanted to do a VHF, certainly I would much rather have it over a cell phone than the VHF radio. But even if you had to put it on the VHF radio, you could do that.
And I think perhaps, as I reviewed our thoughts on this before, you know, I think perhaps the best answer would be to remind the docs that they can ask for this information. And if you happen to get a Rensselaer County dispatcher on the phone saying Pittstown is 25 minutes out, they say they have a STEMI, you can say, please tell them to give you the patient's name and date of birth and get that information back.
We've actually started, we do a bi-monthly training. That's going to be something we're going to start mentioning at every bi-monthly training, just to sort of get in the habit. If it's a STEMI, you're not going to be talking to us directly. If you're working through the dispatcher, just give us the date of birth, give us the correct name, and we'll call it up early and potentially avert unnecessary procedures.
Yeah, makes sense. The fear of
Totally unaware of.
the fun about the transmit the EKG to the local community hospital would be they transmit the EKG that is a STEMI, just like the last STEMI that the patient was transferred out for. You know, and then, well, now what do you, right? But I think it makes good sense. It's good we have the discussion. So I would say keep on going with the training exactly the way you're doing with it. We probably don't have anything else to add from a regional perspective. Do you think? Okay, good. Thank you. 2 items of new business and then some old business, just quick updates. The first is we have a request for a vote to cancel the meetings. Is there anybody that's interested in making a motion to cancel meetings for July and August? Oh, thank you, Dr. Goins. I honestly was afraid that this might get voted down. Is there a second? Sarah, thank you. All in favor? Excellent. Another motion to conduct any business that we need to do electronically, if necessary, over the summer, in case anything were to come up. Motion from Dr. Vogel, second from Dr. Doynow. All in favor? Thank you all. All right. The Camp Bisco Music Fest update first. Is there anything that the region needs to know, Rich, since this is your conflagration?
Yeah. We are a contracted service provider to Camp Bisco. We're providing them with 2 ALS units, one for roughly a 12-hour day each day and one for a 15-hour day. My understanding is that another agency will be providing a 3rd ALS unit 24 hours a day. Our 2 ALS rigs will be stationed at the Mariahville Firehouse, which is outside of the actual venue site. And that's intentional on our part. I do not want our rigs in the venue because of various reasons, for liability reasons. It's a go, they have signed a contract with us, we have required, I'll go on the record publicly with this, we have required payment up front because of bad past experiences dealing with similar types of promoters, not necessarily this one. So as long as they make payment on or before June 21st, we will be there. If they do not, we will not, and I will let Mr. Denny and Mr. Nusback know about that.
Okay, sounds good. Joe, anything else to add on this process? Very quiet today, Mr. Chairman.
Is there going to be on-site medical beyond the ambulance, or there's not the ambulance, but?
BLS.
On-site medical?
I'm sorry?
On-site medical? for the
My
facility?
understanding is, and this is not within my control, is that a volunteer squad, a BLS volunteer squad, will have an ambulance in there around the clock, and there will also be EMTs. I don't know who's coordinating the healthcare they're providing, but there will be EMTs inside scurrying about doing what EMTs do. They're not within my span of control, thankfully.
Being coordinated, but the on-site healthcare is going to be organized by Waynesboro.
Are they running the
They're running the
first aid station, whatever it is, Joe, too?
Right.
Okay.
They're responsible for that as well,
Okay.
BLS ambulance.
Okay. Well, we have clarification there.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And an update on BLS naloxone. We have gotten some of the best press that I've seen in a long time, actually from a couple of different sources lately. And something that I'm actually going to ask staff here to concentrate on doing is going to be to collect positive press as it comes out and get it out to the group so you can see what's hitting the newspapers. Before I talk about BLS Narcan, there were 4 days of issues of the Saratogian with extremely good coverage of EMS that was reading very favorably. Our own Nash Alexander was quoted in there a number of times. And accurately from what I could guess, because the comments all made a lot of sense, which is good. But I thought they did a very nice job of addressing EMS. And BLS naloxone was kicked off in March, as you'll remember, for some of the agencies themselves. And the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Department is now live out in Rensselaer County with the medication as well. And got really good press on that. This has also been picked up on Long Island. I went down there for their kickoff. A lot of interest. They were very thankful for the leadership from Remac. And you know, Tim, Chris, you guys are in the middle of the process as it goes. Seem like it's going pretty smoothly so far.
I mentioned Monroe Livingston is up with it, and there's another one more region?
Well, Arams and Mountain Lakes are also involved, but I don't believe either has any agencies that are live yet. And Monroe Livingston was going to be starting to educate sometime later this month.
I received an inquiry from Nassau as well. I know Suffolk is participating now, Nassau wants to participate as well.
If you have
Forgot
one,
about
you
the
must
Woods
have the other.
Brothers publicity.
What?
The Woods Brothers baby delivery publicity.
Oh, yeah.
Baby resuscitation.
Yeah, baby resuscitation and kangaroo care in flight. In order to assure that they could keep the patient warm enough, they packaged the patient with the mother. I understand. It seems to have gone very well. It's going to end up being a case report in one of the Air Med journals, I believe. Any other new business or other items to address from anybody?
Mike,
Please.
did we talk about narrowbanding here, or was that Arams? I can't remember between
Arams.
the two. Okay. I know Arams just put out a quick notification to ask the hospitals if they had addressed it yet, and they found that their hospitals hadn't started to address it. And the communication issue, or not having communication in a couple months, became an issue. I didn't know if you wanted to get involved with it on the regional level.
I would say that probably not through here, maybe get staff to make sure that staff can address it. Thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it. Tim, just to make sure we can get notice out to the hospitals about the narrowbanding requirement. Make sure.
Yeah,
that
I
patients
actually
getting
sent
here.
that out 2 or 3 times. We'll do it again. Also working with some folks from New Scotland Communications to have a seminar here. Once we get some dates, I'll invite anybody that's interested. We've sent 2, if not 3, regional advisory reminders out to date. And once we get a seminar date, everybody will get an invitation to that.
Okay,
And
make
when
sure
does
that
that
goes out to the
have to be?
nurses committee as well. What?
January 1, I believe, isn't it, Joe?
January 1, 2013.
Yep.
So at that point, everybody will have to change their.
I know Saratoga County at one point had put out a lot of very good informational materials. Might be worth reaching out to get it.
I have a complete narrow banding packet of
Packet, yeah.
information we received, and that's going out twice, if not 3 times. Be happy to send it again, and once we have that seminar date, everybody will be notified.
Tim, I know Aram's had stated that that same packet that you got had gone to each of the hospitals. The trouble that the hospitals reported back was that the ED managers may not have received those packets because they got sent to a CEO and buried somewhere, so they actually ended up reaching out personally to each place.
Well, we're working with the hospitals as well. Communications folks at the hospitals utilized Anne Marie Cross a little bit to disseminate some info there too.
Cool.
So
Okay.
we're making sure the people that need to know do know.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. All right, thank you, important piece of information. Anything for anybody else?
Just some secret shopper stuff. As you all know, I spend a fair amount of time in the street, and I have noticed that, and this is something you really can't tell from your EMS charts or PCRs, is the order of when they do the EKG and when they give the nitro. I can tell you that it's been my experience many times the 12 lead is getting done before the nitro. So it's just something you might want to check on with your agencies. Each time I've stood there, I brought it up, but that only reaches a very small number.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. Broder, any bad news for us?
Not that I know of. Everything's bad. Can't get the drugs.
Because Long Island can't get worse at normal.
I'm glad to hear that some pharmacy departments are stepping up and helping you guys out.
Yeah, doing a great job. Great job. Well, hopefully whatever's happening on Long Island will come up this way, including the midazolam shortage and the traffic actually suggests not to come
I
up.
enjoy that traffic. It's much easier to fly right over the sound.
I believe that. I believe that. All right, entertain a motion to adjourn. And seconded, and all in favor. Thank you.